first light of dawn was still a distant promise when the alarm on her phone began its shrill, insistent beeping. Alara's hand fumbled in the dark, smacking the small screen until the noise stopped. For a moment, she just lay there, wrapped in a thin, worn-out blanket that did little to fight the morning chill creeping through the window cracks. The air in the small apartment was thick with the smell of stale air and the faint, medicinal scent of her mother's cough syrup. It was a smell she had come to associate with both love and worry. She swung her legs off the pull-out couch, her feet hitting the cold linoleum floor with a soft thud. The couch groaned in protest as she stood up, her body already aching with a fatigue that went deeper than her muscles. It was a weariness that had settled in her bones over the years, a constant companion. Across the room, her younger brother, Leo, was a small lump under a pile of blankets, his breathing soft and even. She tiptoed over to pull the covers up to his chin, her heart clenching with a fierce protective love. He was only 10, and he deserved more than this cramped, drafty room. More than a sister who was always too tired to play, moving as quietly as a ghost. She peeked into the other small room. Her mother, Maya, was asleep, her forehead beaded with a light sweat. The bottle of medicine on the bedside table was a stark reminder of why Alara did this, why she endured the endless days. The doctor's bills were a mountain of paper that grew higher every month, a monster she was constantly trying to outrun. She quietly closed the door, not wanting to wake her. In the tiny kitchen, she put 2 slices of bread in the toaster, the cheapest brand from the corner store. While they cooked, she splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the cracked mirror, looking back at her with dark, tired eyes. She remembered a time when those eyes had sparkled with ambition, when she had dreamed of university and a career that felt bigger than this. Now, those dreams felt like someone else's life, stories she had once read. After eating her plain toast, standing up, she pulled on her worn-out jeans and a faded hoodie. It was the same uniform she wore almost every day, a uniform of invisibility. With one last look at her sleeping family, she slipped out of the apartment and into the dimly lit hallway. The stairs creaked under her feet as she made her way down to the street. The city was just beginning to wake up. A few cars rumbled by, their headlights cutting through the morning mist, and a sanitation worker was hosing down the sidewalk. The sound of the water a steady, rhythmic hiss. The bus ride was long and bumpy. She sat by the window, her forehead resting against the cool glass, watching the city change around her. The rundown buildings of her neighborhood slowly gave way to nicer shops and offices, a world that felt completely separate from her own. People got on the bus dressed in clean, crisp clothes, talking on their phones about meetings and projects. She pulled her hood up, feeling like an imposter in their world, a ghost from another side of town. They didn't see her. To them, she was just part of the scenery. A tired girl in a worn hoodie staring out the window. Her first job was at a diner called the Greasy Spoon. The name was an understatement. The air inside was a greasy cloud of bacon, coffee, and disinfectant. The vinyl booths were cracked and sticky, and the constant clatter of plates and the hiss of the grill formed a chaotic symphony that started in her ears and ended in a headache. Her boss, a man named Mr. Henderson with a permanently greasy apron and a sour expression, was already barking orders. Table for needs coffee, and the booth in the corner is a mess. Get moving. She didn't bother to explain that the bus was late. She just nodded, tying an apron around her waist and grabbing a coffee pot. The day was a blur of motion. She refilled countless cups of coffee, her hands moving automatically. She took orders from impatient customers, some of whom barely looked at her, treating her like a part of the machinery. She cleared tables, scraping half-eaten food into a bin, the smell making her stomach turn. Her feet ached, screaming for a rest that never came. During a rare quiet moment, she leaned against the counter, her back throbbing. She thought about the books she used to love, the way she used to get lost in stories about faraway places and brave heroes. Now her only story was this: an endless loop of work and exhaustion. A man in a cheap suit spilled his coffee, and when she rushed to clean it up, he snapped at her, "Watch where you're going." "This is a new suit." She mumbled an apology, her face burning with humiliation as she wiped up the mess. Later, A young mother with a crying baby offered her a sympathetic smile. "Rough morning?" she asked kindly. Elara managed a small, tired nod. That tiny bit of human kindness was like a drop of water in a desert, and she held on to it for the rest of her shift. When her 8 hours were finally over, she felt drained. Like a battery that had been completely used up, Mr. Henderson handed her her pay in cash. A small wad of bills that felt impossibly thin for the work she had done. She didn't even bother counting it. She just stuffed it in her pocket and walked out. The afternoon sun feeling harsh on her tired eyes. The second part of her day was a complete contrast. She took another bus to the city's financial district, a land of gleaming glass towers and pristine sidewalks. Her second job was cleaning offices. She changed into a simple gray uniform in a tiny restroom and joined a small crew of other silent workers. They were like shadows moving through the empty, luxurious offices after all the important. People had gone home. Her job was to clean the top floor of a particularly impressive building. The offices were huge, with thick carpets and mahogany desks bigger than her entire kitchen. She emptied expensive trash cans, filled with discarded coffee cups and crumpled-up papers that held the secrets of million-dollar deals. She polished glass windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city, a view of a world she could only see from the outside, looking in. She felt invisible here, more so than at the diner. In the diner, people at least saw a waitress. Here she was just a cleaning lady, a function. A ghost who erased the day's mess so the next day could begin anew. Pristine and perfect. She vacuumed the long, silent hallways, the sound of the machine loud in the emptiness. She wondered what it would be like to work in a place like this. To sit behind one of those big desks and make decisions that mattered. To look out that window not as a cleaner, but as an owner. The thought was so painful and so far away that she quickly pushed it down. It was a dangerous kind of thinking, the kind that led to disappointment. She finished her shift just before midnight, her body screaming with exhaustion. The bus ride home was even quieter. The city was a blur of neon lights and dark streets. She rested her head against the cool glass again, just as she had that morning. But now the city lights didn't represent opportunity. They were just a reminder of everything she wasn't. A world of bright, shining possibilities that was always just out of reach. She felt a familiar sense of despair settle over her, heavy and suffocating. Was this all her life would be? An endless cycle of 2 jobs. A tired body and a heart that was slowly forgetting how to hope. She watched the lights blur past her eyes, each one a star in a galaxy she could never visit. She was just a tiny, invisible speck, hurtling through the darkness, and the weight of it all felt almost too much to bear. The bus rumbled on, carrying her back to the small apartment, back to the pull-out couch, to do it all over again tomorrow. The afternoon shift at the Greasy Spoon was always the worst. The morning rush was fast and frantic, but it had an energy to it. The afternoon, though, was slow, heavy, and hot. The sun beat down on the old roof, turning the small diner into a stuffy box that smelled of fried onions, stale coffee, and the sweet, sickly scent of the air freshener Mr. Henderson plugged into the wall. Elara moved through the tables like she was walking through mud, her feet aching, her back a constant dull throb. She refilled ketchup bottles, wiped down sticky tables, and took orders from people who looked as tired as she felt. The bell over the door jingled. A sound that usually signaled more work, more demands. But the man who walked in was different. He didn't belong here. He was wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment's rent for a year, but it was a mess. The jacket was wrinkled, as if he'd slept in it, and his tie was loosened and crooked. His hair, once probably neat and styled, was disheveled. He moved with a strange slowness, like a man carrying a heavy, invisible weight on his shoulders. He didn't look at the menu on the wall or the other customers. He just slid into the booth in the far corner, the one with the torn vinyl seat that nobody ever wanted, and stared out the window at the grimy street. Lara watched him for a moment from behind the counter. He wasn't a regular. He wasn't a lost tourist. He was something else entirely. She grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her feet protesting every step. When she reached his table, he didn't look up. He just kept staring out the window, his eyes unfocused, seeing something far beyond the passing cars and littered sidewalks. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice quiet. He flinched, as if her voice had pulled him from a deep sleep. He turned his head slowly, and for the first time, she saw his face. It was pale and drawn, with deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. He looked exhausted, but it was more than that. It was a deep, soul-crushing weariness that she recognized instantly, because she felt it in her own bones every single day. "Coffee," he said, his voice raspy. "Black." She nodded and placed the water glass on the table. As she walked back to the counter, she felt a strange pang of something for him. It wasn't pity. It was more like a sense of familiarity. She knew that look. It was the look of someone who had lost a fight, a big one, and was just now realizing the cost. The small TV mounted in the corner of the diner, usually showing soap operas or talk shows, was on a news channel. The volume was low, but the headline at the bottom of the screen was big and bright: "Finch Innovation Stocks in Freefall." A picture of the man from the booth, looking sharp and confident, was next to the news anchor. Ilara's eyes widened. So that's who he was, Mr. Finch, the billionaire. The tech genius everyone talked about. The man who had everything. She looked back at him, huddled in the corner booth in his expensive rumpled suit. He didn't look like a man who had everything. He looked like he had nothing left. A couple of men at the counter noticed the TV, then turned to look at the man in the booth, whispering to each other. A woman at a nearby table did the same, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and curiosity. They saw a fallen celebrity, a scandal. They saw a headline. Ilara saw something else. She saw the way his shoulders slumped, the way he held his head in his hands for a moment, his fingers digging into his temples. She saw a man who was drowning right there in public, and nobody was throwing him a rope. They were just standing on the shore watching. She knew what that felt like. She felt like she was drowning every day, and the world just kept moving, not noticing the silent struggle. She poured the coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the pot. As she carried it back to his table, she felt a strange sense of calm. The noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the grumpy voice of Mr. Henderson from the kitchenette all faded into the background. All she could see was this one man, this one island of pain in a sea of indifference. She placed the mug on the table in front of him. He didn't look up. He just kept staring at his hands. She stood there for a second, the coffee pot still in her hand. She thought about her mother, lying in her room, worried about bills. She thought about her brother, who deserved a better life. She thought about her own dreams, scattered like dust. She knew what it was like to have a bad day, a day that made you feel like you couldn't go on. And she knew that sometimes the smallest thing could make a difference. Not a grand gesture, but a simple act of kindness. A moment of connection. She made a decision. It was probably a stupid one. Mr. Henderson would be mad, but it felt like the right thing to do. She leaned in a little closer, so only he could hear her over the diner's noise. "The coffee's on the house," she said softly. He finally looked up, his eyes a cloudy gray, meeting hers. They were filled with a confusion so deep it was heartbreaking. He was probably used to people wanting things from him all the time. He wasn't used to this. Ilara gave him a small, gentle smile. It was a genuine smile, one she hadn't felt on her face in a long time. "Sometimes the worst days just need a warm cup to end them," she added. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The cloud of confusion seemed to part for just a second, replaced by a flicker of something else. Surprise? Gratitude? He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. He saw not a waitress in a greasy spoon, but a person. A person who had seen his pain and offered a small bit of comfort without asking for anything in return. Ilara gave a small nod and turned to walk away, her heart beating a little faster than normal. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't about the money, the few dollars the coffee would cost. It was about the feeling. For the first time in a very long time, she hadn't just been a cog in a machine. She had made a choice, a human choice. She had reached out to another person who was hurting. And in that moment, her own pain felt a little less sharp. For the rest of her shift, she was aware of him. He didn't leave. He just sat there, slowly sipping his coffee. He didn't look at his phone or a newspaper. He just sat, and sometimes she could feel his eyes on her as she worked. He watched her clear a table, her movements efficient and practiced. He watched her patiently explain the menu to an old man who couldn't hear well. He watched her laugh softly at something the cook yelled from the kitchen window. He wasn't staring in a creepy way. It was more of a quiet, observant look. He was seeing her, not as a waitress, not as a poor girl from the wrong side of town, but as a person who was working hard, who was kind, who was resilient. And as her shift came to an end and she began to wipe down the counters, she saw that he was still there, waiting. The dinner crowd was starting to trickle in, but he remained in his corner booth, an island of stillness in the growing chaos. He had finished his coffee, but he made no move to leave. He was just waiting, and Alara had a strange feeling that he was waiting for her. The dinner rush was beginning to filter in, a new wave of hungry people with tired faces. The bell over the door jingled relentlessly, and the noise level in the diner climbed a few notches. Alara finished wiping down the last of the lunch counters, her movements slow and mechanical. All she wanted was to go home, soak her aching feet in a basin of hot water, and fall into the oblivion of sleep. She untied her apron, the stained, greasy fabric, feeling like a weight she was finally casting off. She balled it up and stuffed it into her bag, ready to slip out the back door and disappear into the night. But as she turned to leave, she felt a pair of eyes on her. It was the man in the corner booth, Mr. Finch. He hadn't moved. He had just sat there, a silent statue in the growing chaos, watching the world and her move around him. He caught her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a summons. It was a question. Her heart gave a little flutter of apprehension. What could he possibly want? Her boss, Mr. Henderson, glared at her from the kitchen window, a clear signal that she was on his time. She hesitated for a second. Then, against her better judgment, she walked over to his table. "Is everything okay with your coffee?" she asked, her voice low. He looked up at her, and in the dim light of the diner, his eyes seemed less cloudy, more focused. "The coffee was perfect," he said. His voice was still raspy, but it had a new calmness to it. "That's not why I asked you to come over. I was wondering if you had a moment." "Just to talk." Alara felt a wave of suspicion. She had been approached by men before with offers that were disguised as help, but were anything but. "I'm off the clock," she said, her voice a little firmer than she intended. He seemed to understand her hesitation immediately. He held up his hands, a gesture of peace. "I'm not asking for anything else. I promise. I wanted to thank you. For the coffee, and for what you said." Paused, looking down at his empty mug. "It was a very bad day. The worst, probably. And you were the only person all day who didn't see a headline or a stock price. You just saw a man having a bad day." Alara didn't know what to say to that. She just stood there, her bag slung over her shoulder, feeling a strange mix of discomfort and a flicker of pride. "I was watching you," he continued, his eyes meeting hers again. There was no creepiness in his gaze, only a deep, genuine curiosity. "I watched you work. You're very good at your job. You're efficient. You anticipate what people need before they have to ask. You handled that grumpy man at the counter with a patience I don't possess. You were kind to that old man who couldn't decide what he wanted. You see things. You notice details." He was right. She did notice things. It was a skill born of necessity, of trying to avoid trouble and make a few extra dollars in tips. But no one had ever really noticed it before. To everyone else, it was just part of the service. To him, it seemed like something more. "Why do you do it?" he asked, the question so simple and yet so profound it caught her off guard. "This job. I saw you get on the bus this morning. You looked exhausted then. You've been here for 8 hours. You're still standing. Where do you go from here?" Something about his directness, his complete lack of pity, disarmed her. He wasn't asking because he felt sorry for her. He was asking like a scientist studying a subject with a pure, unadulterated need to understand. She found herself answering before she could stop herself. "I have another job," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I clean offices." Down in the financial district, he nodded slowly, as if this piece of information fit perfectly into a puzzle he was solving in his head. "And after that, I go home. I sleep for a few hours, and then I do it all over again. And is that enough?" He asked, "Is that enough for you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. It was a question she asked herself every single day, a question she tried to bury under layers of exhaustion and routine. She felt a sudden, surprising sting in her eyes. She looked away, toward the flashing neon sign of the liquor store across the street. "It pays the bills," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My mom is sick. My little brother? He needs things. It's not about what's enough for me. It's about what's enough for them." She hadn't meant to say so much. She didn't know this man. But the words just tumbled out, pulled from a place deep inside her that she kept locked away most of the time. When she looked back at him, his expression had softened. He wasn't looking at a poor girl anymore. He was looking at her, Alara, a person carrying a heavy burden. "I see," he said softly. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her. The noise of the diner seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of them in that little bubble of silence. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on the sticky table, and his voice dropped to an intense, focused tone. "I want to tell you something," he began, "and I want you to really listen. Today I lost more money than you will probably see in your entire lifetime. My company, which I built from nothing, is falling apart. The world thinks I'm a failure. And sitting here in this diner, I felt completely worthless." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But you, with your one small act of kindness, gave me something that no amount of money can buy. You gave me a moment of peace. You solved my problem, not with a loan or a business plan, but with perspective." He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze so intense, it felt like he was looking directly into her soul. "And that's when I realized something about you. You're making a terrible mistake." Alara flinched. A mistake? What had she done wrong? "You're selling your hours for pennies because you think that's all you have," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You think your value is in your hands, in your ability to carry plates and clean floors. You're wrong. Your time is your least valuable asset. Your mind, that's your real wealth." She stared at him, completely lost. Her mind? Her mind was filled with worries about bills and her mother's health and whether the bus would be on time. What wealth was there in that? "You see things others don't," he pressed on, his words gaining speed and passion. "You saw I was having a bad day? You see how to make this diner run more smoothly? I can tell. You probably see 100 little problems and 100 little solutions every single day. And you dismiss them because you think they're not your place to fix. You solved my problem tonight, not with money, but with perspective. That insight you have, that ability to see what's really going on, that's a skill. That's a product. That's the only currency that can never be devalued." He leaned back, his words hanging in the air between them. Alara felt dizzy, as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. It was the most insane, most wonderful thing anyone had ever said to her. Her mind, her tired, worried mind, was her real wealth. It was a concept so foreign, so huge, she could barely grasp it. "Stop selling your time," he said, his voice final and clear. "Start selling that insight. Find a problem, any problem, big or small, and be the one who sees the solution nobody else does. That is how you change your life. Not by working more hours, but by using what you already have inside you." He fell silent. Alara just stood there, speechless, her mind racing. The words echoed in her head, bouncing off the walls of her exhaustion and disbelief. It was too much. It was a dream. It had to be. Mr. Finch reached into the pocket of his expensive suit and pulled out a wallet. He took out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table between them. Alara's eyes widened. That was more than she made in a day. More than she made in 2 days. "This isn't a handout," he said, anticipating her refusal. "And it's not a tip. It's a payment. For the consultation. The first one." He slid the bill across the table toward her. "Consider it a retainer. Your first client." Then he stood up, straightening his wrinkled suit. He gave her a small, tired, but genuine smile. "Thank you, Alara." He knew her name. He must have seen it on her name tag, a small detail she had forgotten she was even wearing. And then, just as quietly as he had arrived, he turned and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the noisy, crowded street. Alara stood frozen for a long time, staring at the empty booth, then down at the $100 bill on the table. It felt like it was burning a hole in the sticky vinyl. The noise of the dinner rush rushed back in, but it sounded distant, muffled. All she could hear were his words, playing over and over in her mind. Your mind is your real wealth. Start selling that insight. Find a problem. Be the one who sees the solution. She slowly reached out and picked up the bill, the crisp paper feeling strange and heavy in her hand. It wasn't the money that made her hands tremble. It was the words. The priceless, terrifying, wonderful words that had just tilted her entire world on its axis. The bell over the door jingled again, pulling her back to the noisy, greasy reality of the greasy spoon. Mr. Henderson was glaring at her from the kitchen, his arms crossed. She was still on his clock, standing there like a statue. She quickly folded the $100 bill, her fingers trembling slightly, and shoved it deep into her pocket. It felt thick and heavy, a secret against her thigh. She gave her boss a quick nod, untied the apron she had just tied on, and hurried out the back door into the cool night air. The bus ride home was a blur. The city lights, which just that morning had felt like a mocking display of a world she couldn't enter, now looked different. They weren't just lights anymore. They were windows into offices, into homes, into businesses. Each one, she thought, probably had a problem. A leaky faucet, an inefficient filing system, a frustrated employee. The words of the billionaire echoed in her head, a strange and persistent rhythm against the rumble of the bus. Your mind is your real wealth. Start selling that insight. It was insane. It was the kind of thing people said in motivational posters, not real life. What did he know about her life? He didn't know the fear that gnawed at her stomach when she thought about the rent. He didn't know the ache of seeing her mother grow weaker. He could afford to think big thoughts. She was just trying to survive, and yet, as she walked from the bus stop to her apartment building, she found herself observing things in a new way. She saw the overflowing trash can on the corner and thought they could use a bigger one, or empty it twice a day during rush hour. She saw a young mother struggling with a stroller and a bag of groceries and thought, a ramp there would make all the difference. A's thoughts weren't new. She'd had them before. But they had always been fleeting, dismissed as useless complaints. Now, they felt like something else. Like data. Like insight. When she let herself into the quiet apartment, the weight of her reality came crashing back down. The familiar smell, the dark silence, the pull-out couch waiting for her. Her mother was awake, coughing softly in her room. Alara went in, and Maya looked at her with worried eyes. You're late? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Mom, Alara said, forcing a smile. Just a long day. She helped her sit up and gave her a sip of water. The rent was due in 3 days. The electricity bill was sitting on the tiny kitchen table, a red final notice stamped on it. The $100 bill in her pocket felt like a fire. She could pay the electricity bill. She could buy the good medicine her mother was supposed to have. It would be so easy to just spend it, to solve one of the many immediate problems screaming for her attention. But she couldn't. It felt like it would be a betrayal. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol. It was the first payment for a skill she didn't even know she had. If she spent it on groceries, she was telling herself that the billionaire was wrong. That her only value was in the cash she could bring home. She found an old book on the shelf, tucked the bill inside, and pushed it to the back. She would survive. She always had. But this idea she had to protect. The next day, she went to her second job, cleaning the gleaming offices in the financial district. But she wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. She was an observer. As she emptied the trash, she noticed the sheer volume of wasted paper. They could use a double-sided printing default, she thought. As she polished the glass walls of a conference room, She saw the awkward layout of the chairs, always in a jumble after a meeting. A simple diagram on the wall showing how to rearrange them would save someone 10 minutes every day. Her biggest observation came from her fellow cleaners. They all complained about the supply cart. It was old and wobbly, one of the wheels always veering to the left, making a terrible scraping noise on the pristine floors. The bags were always in the wrong place, the spray bottles would tip over. It was a small, constant frustration that made their hard jobs just a little bit harder. Alara watched them, kicking the cart, muttering under their breath. And in her mind, she started redesigning it. Bigger wheels that locked, a specific slot for each bottle, a bag holder that was easier to access. It was a clear, simple solution to a real, tangible problem. The idea grew inside her until it felt like it would burst out. She had to do something with it, but what? On her one day off, instead of sleeping, she found herself walking to the public library. It was a place she hadn't been since she was a child, a place of quiet and warmth. She sat down at one of the free computers, her heart pounding with a nervous energy she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what she was doing, but she knew she had to start somewhere. She created a free blog. It took her an hour just to come up with a name. She didn't want to use her own. It felt too exposed. Finally, she typed in the words, "The street-level solution." Felt right. It was about seeing things from the ground up. Then she stared at the blank white screen. What could she possibly write that anyone would want to read? She thought of the cleaning cart. It was real. It was practical. She started to type, her fingers clumsy on the keyboard. She didn't use big words or fancy business terms. She just wrote like she was talking to a friend. She described the wobbly wheel, the tipped-over bottles, the frustration of her coworkers. Then she described her solution, step by step. She even drew a crude diagram with the mouse. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't professional. But it was honest. When she was done, she read it over. It felt silly. Who would care about a cleaning cart? With a deep breath, her finger hovering over the mouse, she clicked publish. A wave of fear and embarrassment washed over her. She quickly shut down the computer and practically ran out of the library, her face burning. What had she just done? She had put a piece of her mind, her insight, out into the world for anyone to see. It was terrifying. For the next few days, she was too scared to even look. She went to work. She came home. She took care of her family. But the blog was always there, a tiny humming secret in the back of her mind. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, she went back to the library on her next day off. Her hands were shaking as she logged in. She stared at the screen, her heart in her throat. There, next to her post, was a number. It said views 47. 47 people had read her words. It felt like 1,000,000. She scrolled down and saw that there was one comment. Her stomach clenched. It was probably someone making fun of her. She clicked on it. The comment was from a user named Janitor Joe. It said, "I don't know who you are, but I work in a school and our cart is a nightmare." This is actually a really smart idea. The diagram helped. "I'm going to try to rig something up like this. Thanks." Alara read the comment 3 times. Then 4 times. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so powerful and unfamiliar it brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't money. It wasn't a job offer. It was something more. It was validation. Her insight, her observation, her simple idea from the street level had helped someone. It had real value. It was the first tiny green shoot pushing through the cracked pavement of her life. She wasn't just a girl who cleaned offices and served coffee. She was a problem solver. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a spark of something that had been almost extinguished. Hope. The world didn't change overnight. The $100 bill stayed tucked inside the old book, a silent reminder of a conversation that felt more like a dream. For weeks, Alara went about her routine, the billionaire's words echoing in the quiet moments of her day. Your mind is your real wealth. It felt like a cruel joke some days, as she scrubbed a stubborn stain off a carpet or dealt with an angry customer at the diner. But the seed had been planted, and it was slowly, stubbornly, pushing its way through the cracks in her life. She kept writing on her blog, "The street-level solution." It became her secret outlet, her private classroom. She wrote about the inefficient way the diner stacked its clean dishes, which led to frequent breakage. She wrote about a simple, color-coded system for the recycling bins in the office building she cleaned, which would save the night crew time. She wrote about the pothole on the corner of her street that always flooded when it rained, suggesting a simple regrading of the road that would save the city money on repairs in the long run. Her posts were simple, practical, and written in plain language. They were born from real experience, not from a textbook. Slowly, the blog started to get a small following. It wasn't a viral sensation, but it was a dedicated group of people. Other service workers, small business owners, municipal employees, they saw the truth in her observations. The comments section became a community of people sharing their own street-level problems and solutions. Ilara found herself spending her rare breaks at the library, not just writing, but reading the comments, engaging with people, feeling a sense of connection she had never known. She wasn't just invisible anymore. She was a voice. The turning point came from a post she wrote about the local community food pantry. She had volunteered there once with her mother, and the experience had stuck with her. The process was demoralizing. People waited in long lines, sometimes in the cold, to receive a pre-packaged box of food, much of which they didn't want or couldn't use. It created a lot of waste and a lot of frustration. On her blog, she sketched out a new idea. What if she suggested they set it up like a small grocery store? People could come in, choose the items they needed, within a certain point system. It would give them dignity, reduce waste, and create a more pleasant experience for everyone. She included a simple floor plan and a breakdown of how the point system could work. She didn't think much of it. It was just another idea. But a woman who ran the neighborhood center saw the post. She was so impressed that she printed it out and brought it to the board of the food pantry. They were skeptical at first, but the woman was persistent. They finally agreed to a small trial run, and they asked Ilara, the anonymous blogger, if she would help consult on the project. It was terrifying. Ilara had never spoken in a boardroom. She had never led a meeting. But she thought of the billionaire's belief in her, and she said yes. The project was a resounding success. The new system was more efficient, the clients were happier, and food waste was cut by almost half. A local newspaper wrote a small story about the innovative new model at the food pantry, and they mentioned the blog, the street-level solution, as the source of the inspiration. The phone started to ring. It started small. The owner of a local bakery called, asking if she could look at their morning rush workflow. Then a small retail shop wanted help understanding why customers were leaving without buying anything. Ilara was nervous, but she realized she had been preparing for this her whole life. She would go to these places, not as a high-priced consultant, but as an observer. She would watch. She would listen to employees and customers. And she would see the small, simple problems that were creating big frustrations. Her solutions were never complicated or expensive. They were about changing a layout, rewriting a sign, or adjusting a schedule. She called her little one-woman business Ilara Consulting, and she worked out of the library and the coffee shop. Within 2 years, her life was unrecognizable. She wasn't a millionaire. She still worried about money sometimes, but she was no longer poor. She had moved her family out of the drafty one-room apartment and into a small, clean 2-bedroom in a safer neighborhood. The windows sealed properly, and the air smelled of her mother's cooking, not sickness. With her new income, her mother was able to see a specialist and get the proper medication she needed. She wasn't cured, but the constant, racking cough had subsided, and she had more good days than bad. Her brother, Leo, now had his own room, with a real desk and a lamp for his homework. He was thriving in school. Ilara herself was back in school too. She was taking night classes at the community college, not for a specific degree, but for herself. She was learning about business and writing, filling in the gaps in her education. She sat in classrooms with people her own age, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt like she belonged. The final scene takes place on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Ilara is sitting in a modern, bright coffee shop, a world away from the greasy spoon. The air smells of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries. She's at a small table by the window, a notebook open in front of her. She's sketching out an idea for a client, a local bookstore that wants to create a more welcoming space for kids. Her pen moves confidently across the page, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looks different. The tired, haunted look in her eyes is gone, replaced by a calm, focused energy. She's wearing a simple but clean sweater, and her hair is neat. She looks healthy, strong, and in her element. As she takes a sip of her latte, her gaze drifts to the street outside. She sees a man standing on the corner, well-dressed in a business suit, but looking completely lost. He's pacing back and forth, checking his watch, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. He's on his phone, talking animatedly, his face tight with stress. He looks like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, just like the billionaire had on that fateful day in the diner. Alara watches him for a moment. She sees the familiar slump of his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. She knows that look. It's the look of a problem that feels too big to solve, a day that has gone completely off the rails. She remembers the feeling of being invisible, of being overwhelmed, of thinking that there's no way out. A small smile touches her lips. She closes her notebook, caps her pen, and stands up. She walks to the counter and orders another coffee, a simple black one, just like the one she had given him. The barista hands it to her, the warm cup a comfort in her hand. She pushes the door open and walks out into the sunshine. She approaches the man, who is now ending his phone call with a frustrated sigh. He looks up at her, his eyes weary and distracted. "Excuse me," she says, her voice quiet but clear. She holds out the coffee. "You look like you could use this." The man stares at her, surprised, his stress momentarily forgotten. He looks from the coffee in her hand to her face, and his expression softens. He sees not a stranger, but a person offering a moment of kindness, a small anchor in his storm of a day. He takes the coffee, his fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he says, his voice filled with a genuine raw gratitude. "I really, really needed this." Alara just nods and gives him a small, understanding smile. She doesn't offer any advice. She doesn't tell him about insight or perspective. She just gives him the coffee, a simple, human act of connection. As she turns and walks back into the coffee shop, she feels a warmth spread through her chest that has nothing to do with the sun. She realizes, with a profound sense of peace, that the billionaire's words had changed her life. But it wasn't the advice about business or wealth that had mattered most. It was the lesson he had taught her without even knowing it, that in a world full of people struggling to be seen, the greatest wealth you can have is the ability to see someone else, and to offer them a warm cup on a cold, cold day.